Uh, so we are live. Hi, Simon.
Hello, Paula. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Great. I was missing these webinars that we did together, so it's great to be back.
Yeah. It feels like already a long time, but it's been like what, a month and a half since our last one almost.
I've had that. Yeah, and these are my favorite. When we record the podcast episodes and when we do webinars, I always think it's fun.
Yeah. And definitely, I mean, I think all of the topics that we talk about are interesting, but this one is one that we hear a lot from a lot of people that are there. They really want to hear about, okay, conflict situations, resolving conflict. And yeah, we always say like resolving conflict is difficult whenever you do it, but if it's in your second language, then that's really a challenge. So
It is.
so hopefully today we can we can help some people.
I hope so. I hope so. I think we will provide a lot of, tips and tools. We have the chat open. I think everyone's aware of that. Just make sure it works. So if you would like to type in what your name is and where you come from, I don't know what company you work for. We always read that. And Simon, you can also check that and let me know what people.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And as well, everybody, we always find that these are great opportunities for people to connect with each other if you want. So definitely you can feel free to put in your LinkedIn link in the chat as well. Write down, yeah, where you're from Montreal, Paula. Nice to have you here. So it's great and this is the great thing about these meetings is that it's so international. So we're going to be touching on a few cultural aspects today, which I think are going to be very interesting. And we're going to try to get people involved. We have everybody coming in from France and from Germany. So it's
ooh,
great to have everybody here. Let's jump into it, Paula, if you don't mind.
let's do that. Yeah. So should we introduce ourselves a tiny little bit, just very quickly?
Yeah, we can do that. Just really quickly. I'll give a quick 10-second. For those of you that this is your first webinar, my name's Simon Kennel. I'm the People and Culture Manager at Talaera. So if you're new to Talaera, we're a small ed tech company focusing obviously on business English training. So we're very focused on kind of taking that next step for professionals all over the world with their English. And now we're seeing more and more that teams are working globally, and with that it's navigating these situations in English. One of them is conflict resolution, and so it's one for myself in HR that I feel very passionate about doing this in a good way and in a nice way, and yeah, so that's enough about me. Paula, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the marketing content director here at Talaera. I also started as a business English instructor. I've been teaching communication for about 10 years, and it's something I'm really passionate about. I think the topic that we have today mixes quite a lot of things that I'm interested in, and that is communication. We'll talk a little bit about culture. There's a little bit of psychology behind it, and that's also what I studied. I have a master's in industrial psychology, or the psychology of work, basically. So yeah, that's a bit about us. And what we wanted to point out is that today what we're going to share is a three-step strategy with a lot of phrases and communication advice to help all of you navigate conflict, especially when you have teams that come from different cultures. But what is not is, we won't talk about advanced negotiation techniques or how to resolve conflict via email. We'll focus more on the communication and verbal aspects of it. So that's a bit what we have for today.
All right, so I'm excited. Let's jump into it. And we actually have a few people in the chat today from Brazil, and a few people from Israel. I'm sorry, and a few people from India already in the chat here. So we're going to start with kind of a fun little story. I think that should be interesting for some of you. So I'm this is a story that I think is always interesting when we talk about conflict. I had a client that I worked with who was a marketing manager in Israel, and she was working with a team in India. Um, and I got some feedback from this marketing manager telling me that her Indian colleague was very vague, didn't take any feedback, didn't follow through on the promises that he made. And there was this real kind of what started as maybe miscommunication turned into a little bit of a conflict, right? And so I took the chance to then meet with the Indian colleague. And so I met with him, and I heard also from his end, yeah, she is really actually rude in some of the things that she's saying. And she, she just doesn't allow any feedback. She just makes decisions, and then that's it, right? So she doesn't really involve us in the decision-making process. And so I'm kind of standing there with these two people and thinking, okay, what's the issue here, right? And how can we kind of navigate this from both ends? So if you're seeing this already, you think, okay, number one, there's obviously some cultural aspects that are coming to play here. Number two, there's obviously some miscommunication coming to play here. How can we find that road to kind of fix this situation, right? And so that's what we're going to be working on today. We're going to put a pin in this story and come back to it. And so I want everybody to kind of start thinking about these types of situations in the workplace. And yeah, we're going to talk about this 3-step strategy today.
That's exactly what we're going to do. And I also wanted to quickly point out that today we won't do the whole thing. The whole webinar won't be about only cross-cultural communication, but we actually do have, I know a lot of people are interested in how we communicate and work across cultures. And that's what we're going to talk about in August. So we'll share the links later. We're going to have a webinar on how to communicate with people from other cultures then. So yeah, resolving conflict in the workplace, that's the topic that we have for today. And this number here is a little bit scary. $359 billion.
Yeah, this is when I found this number, I was like, no, this is one of these things that someone just puts in an article and it looks really crazy big. But this was actually from a study that was done in 2008. And I really wonder, since then, how much higher this has gone. The amount of wasted paid hours based on workplace conflict, right? So how much productivity is actually wasted because it comes down to some type of workplace conflict. We're communication specialists, so we focus on communication, and really that's a lot of money to be lost because of poor communication.
It is a lot, and this is only in the US, so there's clearly an issue here that we need to solve. And we have a question here for people. I see that people are accessing the chat, so it's definitely working, and we want people to keep using it. And this is a question that we have. How much time per week, on average, do employees spend involved in conflict? Could it be 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour, or 2 hours? This is time per week.
Valerie already says D. Okay, so let's see. I mean, okay, wow. Okay, D. C. Oh, that's good. Okay. There's someone that thinks a little bit better. Okay, but I'm seeing this is wild that, okay, someone says A, 20 minutes. Well, that's great. If
That's
you
awesome.
said A, that's awesome. But most of what I'm seeing is C or D, 1 to 2 hours. Is that really? That's wild.
That's it. It's 2 hours. And here we
Gee.
have also, it's a lot. Yeah, and 85% of employees deal with conflict on some level. It doesn't have to be massive conflict, but there's some sort of conflict that they have to solve. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot. And it's definitely more relevant than ever. These are just some headlines that we found on some great magazines. So it's something that people are worried about, and there's a reason behind it. So let's dive into exactly what we want to show people, right? Like today's agenda. And we'll start with that 3-step strategy to deal with conflict in English. And I want to emphasize the in English part, because this is mainly for non-native English speakers. So we'll be sharing phrases, idioms, strategies, mostly, especially for those who are communicating in their second language. And then we'll talk about that fun part of like that cultural impact that we have on conflict resolution. So are we ready?
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Okay. So some initial tips. Um, the first question that we started asking people, okay, what would you like to know? And then we got this question, how can I prevent conflict from happening in my team?
Mm.
I would love for people to type in the chat if they have any tips, but Simon, do you have any tips to actually prevent it?
We're going to get some initial tips, but I just really quickly want to touch on Alexander in the chat wrote, make a difference between conflict and discussion in quotes, please. And this is a great point. We're going to come to this point, definitely, because there are cultural elements in this, right? What is a conflict versus just a discussion, right? And this is a big cultural element. We're going to come to this. But some quick tips, and I believe we have a slide on some quick tips on how to prevent conflict from happening in our team. And these are kind of my initial 3 tips. This is what works for me, what I always, from an HR background, what I always consider. Number 1 is the earlier the better, right? We say nip it in the bud, which if you see a weed growing, you want to pull it down from the root as quickly as possible, right? So if you sense, and sometimes people have a sense that maybe that conversation didn't end so well, or maybe there might be something here, address it. The quicker the easier, because when we leave time, then people start to create stories in their head about, well, they don't like me, or there's this issue or something like that. So as quickly as possible. And then with that, right, there's also timing, right? So when are you addressing the situation? When are you having this discussion? I mean, I think this is something, especially from my experience, if you work in HR in the chat, I'm sure you know that, the last time that you want to be dealing with some type of employee conflict or something like that is at the end of the day when you're very, very tired, or right before lunch when you're hungry and you've got low blood sugar and you just feel like, okay, I can't handle this right now. Think about this if you need to meet with someone to resolve a misunderstanding, right? And if you're working, across time zones, maybe don't try to get them on a Zoom call at 9 p.m., right? This is something that you should consider.
And also consider the other person's time zone, right?
Exactly right. That's
Super
what I mean.
important.
Like,
Mhm.
if it's a good time for you, it might not be a good time for them. So check in with that first, right? Um, and then the setting, right? So how are we having this conversation? Really focusing, if you have to meet via a video call, treat it like a real conversation, not a lot of distractions, things like this. So these are some initial 3 quick tips for resolving and preventing. But we're going to get into this 3-step strategy that's going to get a lot deeper with the types of communication
Mhm.
that we're using. And if you have any other tips, definitely throw them in the chat. I think, yeah, you can prevent with brainstorming and knowing cultural background. Absolutely. From Nihan, that's a great point, right? If you're in a team, if you're in a cross-cultural team, having that discussion, brainstorm, hey, when we come into these challenges, what's our team agreement on how we're going to navigate this? That's definitely a great point there.
I love that. Communication is crucial. And sometimes, or oftentimes actually, conflict happens because either lack of communication or poor communication. So improving that will really prevent a lot of conflict in the workplace.
There you go.
Um,
There you go.
so yeah, I love that hungry plus angry makes people hangry, and
Yeah,
that's not something you want to have to deal with, right? So
there you go.
find people in the right timing for both parties. Yes. There's a few idioms here. We love idioms, and I know a lot of our students also love idioms. You talked about nip it in the bud. What does that actually mean? You explained it a little bit.
Yeah, so if you see a weed growing up, you need to nip it early. You need to nip it down at the very bottom, which nip it is to pull it out, and you need to nip it in the bud, which is we need to fix this issue as soon as possible before it turns into a bigger problem. And when it
Mhm.
comes to conflict, that's especially the case, especially with workplace conflict, is the earlier the better with these situations.
Right. And at odds with, have you ever been at odds with a colleague?
Um, so I think probably, and we'll talk a little bit about this around, conflict and what is healthy and unhealthy conflict, but I don't think I've ever been at odds with a colleague in a negative way. It's more like I'm at odds with their idea, or
Hmm.
I'm at odds with the way that they're doing this. Yeah. How
Yeah,
about
but in
yourself, Paula?
but in any case, if you are at odds with someone, you definitely want to clear the air, right? You
Yeah,
want to
there you
discuss the
go.
problem, you want to remove bad feelings, you want to clear the air. And sometimes you may say water under the bridge. I
Right.
love this one, which is, it happened in the past and it can't be changed.
Yeah.
So let's not
Keep
worry
the
about
bridge
it.
on. Yeah. 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 And then, of
Hmm.
course, we want to bury the hatchet, which is it comes from that expression of a hatchet is like a knife, and you're burying the knife. You're saying, okay, we're putting away the weapons, we're burying them. Let's move forward. We're making peace. And yeah. And a lot of times, if it's a very kind of intense disagreement, you could say we buried the hatchet. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that should be the goal as well. Going back to that question we got in the chat, what is conflict? And they asked about the difference between conflict and just a discussion.
Yeah, exactly right. So we have really two types of conflict when we think about workplace conflict, right? We have a healthy and then an unhealthy form of conflict. Now, healthy conflict could be really intense disagreements about a strategy, about a product, about a third situation, right? So we're not saying I'm not in a conflict with you, Paula, or the way that you communicated to me before. I'm in a conflict with you about our idea here. How are we going to get to the next stage, right? And some people, I mean, I myself, I know I'm a bit conflict averse, which means I'm not very am prone to go into a conflict, but I know that this can be very helpful, especially when you're brainstorming, when you're having a real discussion, and it can show that, hey, we're all very engaged, we're all very interested in this, right? Paula, you and I have perhaps had conflict on certain things in the past when it comes to like creativity of how we're creating a presentation, right? We've had disagreements,
Mhm.
so that could technically be a conflict, but would you consider that to be an unhealthy conflict?
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be an unhealthy conflict. It's something constructive. We're having a discussion, we're sharing our ideas, and then we're just trying to get to, find common ground and find the ideal destination. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly right.
Hmm.
Exactly right. And in many cultures, showing that, hey, like I'm coming in and I have ideas, that shows that you're engaged, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later with the cultures, but I think it's a good point to discuss.
It is
Yeah.
100%. What about empathy? So empathy is super important when we're trying to deal with conflict, right? Is that ability to share other people's feelings or experiences when we put ourselves in their shoes and we think, okay, how do they feel?
Right.
How what are their expectations? Like how will I ever hurt them if I say this? So it allows you to really think how to act. So yeah, we really need to be empathetic when we're dealing
Yeah,
with
it's the
conflict.
understanding, right, of the other person's feelings, right? It's not, a lot of people mix empathy and sympathy, but it's not sympathy because we're not feeling sorry for someone. We're just saying, okay, Paula, I can understand why you would feel this way, right? And
Mhm.
that's empathy. And it's very important to have when we talk about conflict resolution, 100%.
Yeah. What about diplomatic? Is that something we want to be when we're resolving conflict?
Yeah, so some of you may guess, right? Diplomatic, you may have seen that before with diplomacy, right? So you can say someone is very diplomatic. That typically means that they're open to a dialogue. They're open to finding the agreement or finding a solution together, right? And I think as much as possible, it's important to be diplomatic. I think, yeah, like Paul, like I said, maybe we have our disagreements on small things, but we're always super diplomatic, I think.
Mhm. It's a similar word to polite, right?
Yeah.
It's not 100% the same, but it's a way in which you talk and you try to avoid offending others.
Yeah, and the focus is on finding that solution, right? It's
Mhm.
that I'm honest in this, that we want to find a solution.
Exactly. And you definitely don't want to be rude, do you?
Right. And this is always a good one, right? What some people may consider rude, some people may just consider, yeah, I'm just having a discussion, right? And we'll talk a little bit about this. If you remember the Israeli marketing manager and her Indian colleague, right? They each called each other rude, right? So considering this as we discuss the kind of cultural differences with these as we go forward.
Mhm. Yes. Why does it happen? We said on average 2 hours are wasted resolving conflict, but why? Why is it?
I think, yeah, you can already click next, right? Because I think everybody here already knows, we've already said it very clearly, poor communication, right? Or lack of communication. So we have really two aspects here, right? One is that there's just no communication. The other is that it's, yeah, poor communication, right? And that's why we at Talaera are always focusing on how we can improve our communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's yeah, it's a worthy pursuit.
It is, it is. And so here we have, of course, it can happen when everyone comes from the same background, when everyone shares the same language. But when you are dealing with conflict in another language, there's some additional challenges, right? There may be misunderstandings, the speed, people tend to talk fast and it's difficult to understand them. And you also have to think in your feet, right? You need to think and decide what to do, try to put together a whole sentence when there is a lot of tension. It's a situation that you cannot control. So that also makes you feel, as we said, more anxious. There are cultural differences, as you were saying. What is rude for one person may not be rude for another one. So trying to really understand, okay, how do we all communicate? And freezing. Sometimes you're in that situation and your mind goes blank. You don't have the words you want. And we've always been in this situation where we were having an argument and we really didn't have the right words. And the moment they walk away, you have the perfect speech in your head.
Yeah.
And you're like, too late, too late.
Right. Yeah, and that's when we hear all the time from a lot of our clients is like, if I'm in a meeting, if I'm in any of these situations, but especially in a conflict situation, there is that on the spot feeling, that freezing feeling, right? Like how do I navigate that? How do I kind of work around it so that I can be in control and still feel confident in that? And so today we're going to, yeah, get this 3-step strategy to help everybody do this. So let's dive into this 3-step strategy. And we broke it down into these 3, right? So think about it as you have a strategy when you're in a conflict of starting with active listening. So always starting with listening. And I think this is going to be really helpful if you're approaching a situation that you know is maybe a little bit tense. Always start with, I'm going to make it easy on myself and start with listening. Then we're going to come in with, how do we make our point in English? How do we do this in a way and we're still polite, right? We're still diplomatic, as we talked about. And then once we've listened, we've made our point, then we can build on that together with collaborating, right? And that's really where we find the solution. So we're going to go through these 3 steps. Let's start first with active listening. Paula, what is active listening? When we talk about that, I love this quote that you found, right, from Maya Angelou. I mean, and this kind of touches on this active listening point.
Exactly. So this quote, it's such a great one. I've learned that people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And we all want to be heard and listened to. And that's the first step. If you want to deal with conflict, if you want to resolve conflict, you want to first start by listening. Okay, what's their position? What's their point? What do they actually want to bring across? So active listening is much more than just hearing other people's words. It's really about paying attention to what they're saying and trying to really understand where they want to get, what they want to get out of it. It's really about trying to nitpick and identify those, sometimes also the underlying reasons of their point, right? We may say, I'm mad at you because you were late, but perhaps there was something else behind it. So it's really understanding their tone and the words they're saying and the reasoning behind it. Um, so yeah, it's easy, but there's more to it that one might think initially.
Right. And this is where you talked about before about the psychology behind it. Many times when we're having a conversation, we're actually not as present in just listening as we think we are, right? Um, a lot of times what are we doing? We're just waiting for our turn to say our point, right? And so we're almost listening to like 20-30% of the actual information that's coming in. But what we say when we say active listening is really focusing on being present, right? And really trying to consider all the things that they're saying. And especially if this is your second language, it's even more important because you're going to pick up some very small things that are going to be important for you. So definitely. And I think people always say, well, I need to be ready for what I'm going to say. But what I tell people is, trust yourself that if you actively listen, you will find a much better strategy to give a response than you think you do.
100%. And you can also use some of the words that they said to then feed that into your own speech.
Right.
So yeah, it is a really effective step that one should not skip. People are much more willing to collaborate if they feel that their needs and their thoughts are being listened to. So great first step. How do we do that? We know it's important, but now how do we do it?
Right. So when we talk about active listening, we can kind of break this down. We have what are our nonverbal things? How are we approaching, right? So what is our body language? How are we looking, right? Am I sitting there like this while Paula's, saying something, or am I engaged? Am I listening to what she's saying? Are we using silence? How are we doing that? And then there's verbal, right? Which today we're going to talk about verbal active listening. So it's kind of a little bit of the side. We're listening, but we're going to say some things while we're listening that are going to help us and help the other person how we're communicating. So when we use verbal active listening, we're going to talk about the rasa technique and labeling. So these are two things that you can do, and you can try them right away. You can try them in a conversation. It doesn't need to be a conflict, right? So this is really about what we call facilitating, creating a good conversation. And it's going to be very helpful when it comes to negotiation, when it comes to conflict. The top hostage negotiators in the world use these two strategies, right? So maybe you're not negotiating hostages at your work, but it could be helpful for you. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about the rasa technique. And actually, before we do that, Paula, if you can answer this question that just popped up.
So the question, when I try to explain my opinion, to express my opinion to native speakers, my mind goes blank and I can't speak properly. What can I do? So generally here, I would say, as you said, trust yourself, but there is a preparation behind it. And if you know you're going to have an important conversation with a native English speaker, something that works really well is to put yourself in the mind space of speaking in English. Listen to something in English, listen to a podcast, type something on your computer, try to speak out loud, even if you're on your own, but getting yourself into that English environment will really help you get those words out of your head. And also be honest about it. Say, hey, listen, this is not my first language, and I don't feel as confident as I would like to, but I'll try my best. So you're asking them to be a little bit more patient with you. And I think people would be surprised by how empathetic people tend to be once you say that.
Definitely. And it automatically brings down any level of hostility or any level of irritation. It's automatically down to a much more human level where we think, okay, let's create a compromise here. It shows vulnerability, which in a way can lead to more trust building. So it can definitely be helpful.
Exactly. And I also think it separates, I think as a non-native speaker, we sometimes feel we don't sound as smart
Right.
as we do in our native language. And by expressing that initially, saying, hey, listen, this is not my first language, you're saying, I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot to bring to the table. I just need you to be a little bit patient for me to get that point across,
Right.
as you're separating who you are and how much you know versus your language ability.
Yep.
So yeah. And you were talking about the Rasa technique. I love this technique, and
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, but what is it?
Yeah, so okay, so follow along with me here, people. This is going to be a few steps, but once you practice it a few times, and today after the webinar today, I want you to try this in a conversation. If you are going to have a conversation in English, actively try to use this technique. Again, it's used by a lot of top negotiators, and it's a good way of creating an environment where the other person feels valued and listened to. So how do we do this? Well, say Paula and I were having a discussion and I want to use the Rasa technique. Well, the first thing I want to do is to receive the message, right? And this is where we talk about the body language, right? Am I receiving the message like this? Am I looking down at my phone? What am I doing? How am I receiving it? Or am I making eye contact, or do I have an open attitude, right? Can this person feel that they're listening to me, right? So that's the first point, is this nonverbal aspect. Then we want to move to appreciate, right? And this is something that's very subtle, which means it's very small, but it makes a huge difference when it comes to that person feeling exactly this, feeling appreciated. They feel, okay, they're actually listening to me, right? And so what does that look like when we appreciate? This is the first verbal thing you're going to do. You can do something like, okay, okay. So what am I doing there? I'm showing that I'm considering what the person is saying. I'm listening. I'm actively listening, and I'm considering. If I was just completely quiet and just looking at a spot on the wall, then this other person is getting a signal that I'm not engaged, right? But even a small, okay, that shows this person that, wow, okay, they're listening to me. They're
It
listening.
makes a big difference, but here tone is also super important, because you can
Yes,
say those same three words, oh, and okay, in a very different way,
right. I
right?
could
If you
say,
change the
hmm,
hmm.
okay. And so it's something very, very different, right? Show how I do it. A lot of times we do it with upward intonation, which means we go, right? Up, okay, right? So this shows it takes down the hostility of the language a little
Mhm.
bit. Um,
Right.
and then we get to summarize, right? So this is where we jump in, right? So the other person is talking, you show the appreciation, okay. So it sounds like you think we shouldn't be focusing on this project right now. Okay, so what did I do? I received, I appreciated, and then I summarized. So it sounds like, or it seems like, right? Or so what you're saying is that this project isn't the most important project right now. Okay, so I'm summarizing what they said, and this is a little bit tricky, but while I'm doing that, I'm giving their words back to them, right? A lot of therapists use this actually to give the person's words back to them. And this does two things. Number one, it shows that, wow, okay, they're listening to me. And number two, it makes a clear copy of what we're both agreeing on, right? We're agreeing that you think this project isn't the most important, right? So already we're receiving, we're appreciating, we're summarizing, and then we want to end with asking, right? So I could do something like, okay, so what you're saying is that this project isn't the most important project we should be working on right now. Is that right? Right? Is that right? And how did I do that? I'm asking it back to them because I want to be sure. It shows I'm trying to really understand. I want to be sure. And I'm really taking in their point of view, right? So this sounds like a lot. And trust me, it's easier said than done. And let's go through a few examples here because I think this will kind of help break it down.
Let's look at this example. So I'm going to give you to say a few things, and I would love for you to apply that Rasa technique to see what it sounds like. So if I tell you, I'm doing all the work here and I'm sick of it. Nobody ever helps me with anything, and I'm not getting paid enough for this.
Okay. So you feel like you're taking on more work than others?
Yes, I think there needs to be a change in how we're doing this.
Okay, good. Well played, Paula. Paula,
Woohoo!
she was an actress before now. um, so what did we do there, right? So, I mean, Paula, how did you feel with that kind of jumping in and the way that I used the voice there?
I think it adds it helps the other person shift their perspective and stop for a moment and say, oh yeah, that's actually how I feel. And this person is actually listening to me. So I felt that you were listening to what I was saying, especially by giving that, asking that question, summarizing. I think it works really well.
Great, great. All right, let's try another one. Just so people can see when we're talking about ask, right? How can we do that, right? How do we end that? And there's a few things you can do there, right? Like, okay, so is that right? Was the one I used, but also you can use, so can you clarify that for me? Or when you said this, what did you mean, right?
Hmm.
And think about every time I'm using that, the intonation goes up, right? And this is something that you can practice a little bit. But I don't know, Paula, do you feel like that intonation is really that important at the end of a question?
100%. It can make a huge difference. So if you do it with a rising intonation going up, in you're asking for collaboration, right? You're being more, it's much softer. If you do it going down, it sounds much more aggressive and hostile. So it's a really
Yeah.
important point for sure. Um, Here this was also one of the questions that we got from previous people who signed up. How do I stop or pause a discussion that seems to be getting out of control when things might get out of hand?
Yeah, right. So this is a tough one, right? Because a lot of times there can be a lot of emotion involved. And that's why using the rasa is so important so that people feel that you're, being listened to. But I mean, how do we pause or stop? In my experience, what I do is I exactly say that. Can we take a pause? I use that. Can we take a pause, right? Not can we stop here? Can we take a pause? Can we take a breather, right? Or if you're not in the right mental space for this, can we put a pin in this and maybe discuss this tomorrow? Just because I don't feel I'm in the right headspace for this, right? You can say, I don't feel I'm in the right headspace, which is I'm not in the right place to really have this discussion. Um,
I
I
think
think
that's
those are,
really important. I
yeah,
think that's super important. And we mentioned at the beginning, you should nip it in the bud. You should tackle the issue early on, but that doesn't mean that you should deal or have that conversation at any point. You should feel,
yeah,
safe and stable. And if it's not the right moment, then you should be open about it. It's
yeah.
going to be much more productive that way. But yeah, another example. Should I
Yeah,
go for it?
we'll really quickly touch on this, but just so people can see kind of this same structure. And again, we're going to send all the slides to everyone, but think
Mhm.
about using this today in a meeting that you have possibly later. I see Gustavo has to jump. That's fine, Gustavo. Try to use the rasa in your meeting. Definitely try to use that. So yeah, let's actually push on now while we're talking about the active listening. And we can kind of jump forward to
Mhm.
our next part that we're focusing on, right?
Yeah,
So
so here we
we've
have
gone
a few examples that people can check. Here's a visual as well that you can download later. But yeah, there was another technique when we were talking about active listening that you called labeling technique.
right,
And it's very useful in confrontational or direct cultures.
right, and this is where we always use it. It seemed a little bit like rasa. It's similar to rasa, but then we're focusing on using it feels like, it seems like, it sounds like. Okay, so what does this do? When we use a labeling technique, it uses it as a third party. It's not I feel like, or to me, my opinion is this, this, and this. When we're saying it feels like or it seems like, it's almost like we're putting this as an objective view, right? So it seems like you're a bit upset
Mhm.
with this situation, Paula, right? So that's not I feel like you're upset with this situation. It's an objective thing that Paula that you're upset, right? So and that can open it out to make it a little bit more where you can identify these problem points for
Mhm.
sure.
Exactly. And here's another example as well. Like these new spreadsheets report take a lot of time to do, and I'm completely on my own. You don't offer to help me with them even after you finish your work. And then here's where we use that, as you said, okay, so it feels like you're having real trouble with how tasks are split up and you want us to change. Am I understanding you correctly? Yes,
Yeah.
basically. So we're really trying to put that label on the problem that they were having. And we're also translating the emotional response they may have had, like I'm angry and this doesn't work and things like that, versus, okay, what is actually the issues explained in an objective way.
Yeah,
Mhm.
great.
I love this technique, by the way. It's super helpful. And so we want to avoid things like, why didn't you just ask for help? Or why don't, or you don't get how this works, do you? Or why
Yeah.
didn't you ever say anything? Or the worst one, telling people to calm down. It's worked
Yeah,
zero
that's like
times in the history of conflict.
if you do that, that's like you're just waiting for a problem to arise, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Or even saying, I'm not a mind reader. It's better to just
No.
try to really understand, actively listen to what the other person has to say and trying to rephrase it with your own words to truly see if you understood.
Right, right, right,
So we
right.
have
Great.
tried to understand the other person. Now it's our turn to make our point. And here we've had this question a lot from a lot of our students, and that is, when I face conflict in English, I try to express my ideas, and sometimes I sound rude. Any tips?
Yeah, yeah. And this is where we're going to touch on these cultural aspects, right? Um, but I think you can actually address this, right? In how direct you're working. I think using it feels like, it sounds like, will make it less direct, right? It will
Mhm.
make it so that you're trying to put that emphasis on that this is an objective thing, not that, hey, you're rude. It's not like that. It's, hey, it feels like you were being a little rough in that meeting earlier. That's kind of what it feels like, and so I'm pushing it out a little bit, right? I'm not being so direct. Many times if we're coming from a more direct culture into a indirect culture, it can sound very rude, right? So this is something to think about, and we'll definitely talk about that.
Exactly. And also, you talked about more direct and more indirect cultures. One thing you can use to soften your message is to use what we call downgraders. We have
Yeah.
upgraders and downgraders. Upgraders are things that make it sound very strong. Absolutely, totally, always. You always do that. You're absolutely unprofessional. And if we use the downgraders, we soften the message a little bit, which can be helpful in these tricky situations, like maybe, possibly, could, might. So those tend to be very helpful.
Yeah.
How do we make our point? How can we move forward?
Right. So we've done our active listening, and we're going to kind of push forward now. I know our last 15 minutes here to kind of really give you how we build up these next two steps, right? So we've done our active listening, and now we're going to make our point, right? And we want to do this without sounding so rude. So we do this in three steps, right?
Mhm.
So how can we do this? Number one, you want to find common ground, right? You want to find something that we can agree on. That's really important. How do you do this? You can start with a compliment or something that you both agree on. I always start with something like, okay, can we both agree that, right?
Mhm.
Can we both agree that? If you get that person to say yes, then congratulations, you are off to a great start, right? So really finding that common ground is very, very important.
Mhm. I agree. Then you want to express objective points.
Yeah, right. And
That's
so
right.
what do we mean when we say objective points, Paula?
So this means that you're not really making it personal. You're not talking about what the person is like. You're not saying that they're unprofessional. You're not saying that you're angry. You're just moving in with your points and you're framing them with objectivity and with a story. It's not an excuse. So giving facts, for example, instead of saying you're unprofessional, you can say, well, this person came late 3 times this week. So
Right.
really, really going after the facts. And the last one is to be inclusive and positive. What do we mean by that?
So the best words we can use here is we, us, let's, right? So let us, that's what that's short for. And that's really using that inclusive language, always we, when we're going forward, because we want to signal that, you know, there's been the discussion, we've made our points, and now we can build forward together. Definitely.
100%. So find common ground, focus on objective points, and use inclusive and positive language. That's how you can make your point for sure. And here are some examples. So can we both agree that, that's what you said, try to use objective points here. You can look at the example later, but you know, here it's saying it's difficult for me to do something because I'm trying to bring in new cells and it takes up a lot of my time as well. And that's how you can really focus on the objective points and not just how people feel or what they're like. And you want to be inclusive and positive with, can we find a way to make this work? Let's figure out how we can fix this for both of us. And you're making it really inclusive and positive.
Right.
These ones really worked. I've used them in the past.
Yeah, I use, can we find a way to make this work for everyone or for both of us, right? So this is almost like you're asking them to click yes to solve the problem, right? You're putting the ball in their court, is what we would say, right? You're saying, I'm ready to collaborate, I'm ready to make this work, but can we agree, right? Can we find a way to make this work for everyone? And it's up to you, right? Most times that person is going to say yes, because if they're there, they want to make it work. They want to find a way. And this is a good way to work on going to that that next point. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, this is how you can be direct, but also diplomatic, by using facts, using positive language. Instead of saying you cannot do that, tell them what they can do, for example. If you come from a very direct culture, try to use downgraders. Maybe, perhaps, might, may, could. So those really work, where you can really be direct. You're stating your facts, but you're also being diplomatic. And here again, there's a lot of examples that we'll share when we share the slides with you. And yeah, now we're on the road to a collaborative resolution. That's the last step.
Yeah. So the last step, right? We're talking about collaborating. We've done our active listening. We've made our points. And as you can see here, we're looking for the purple box, right? We're looking for the balance between being cooperative and being assertive, which is getting our point in and also working together. So we want to find that good middle ground, right? That collaborating. That's where we're going to really solve a conflict, but a conflict, solve it in a way to where it will last, right? That the agreement will last. And that's really what we want. So let's kind of push forward with some phrases, right? So I think these are all great. Paula, from these, which is your favorite?
I think I really, really like the last one. How can I support you? What can I do to help you? And we talked about this last month when we were talking about human resources and HR. And instead of trying to guess what the other person wants, we ask them straight away, how can I support you? What can I do to make this better?
Yeah. What is the specific thing that you want that I can do to help you, right? And the tricky thing here is many times people either, number one, they don't know and they haven't thought about it, or number two, the idea in their head, as soon as they say it, they know that that's so ridiculous that that's not objective, right? So this puts you in a good position to where you can find a real collaboration, right? And if they come out with an idea, maybe it's something that you didn't even consider, right? If you said, hey, how can I support you? Maybe they'll say, I just want you to do this. Easy fix, let's do it and move forward, right?
Yeah, it's a really effective one. So yeah, everyone should try that. We don't want to talk too much about grammar, but there's some grammar to compromise, and that is when we talk about conditionals. Second conditional. It's when we offer a solution and we ask them if that would work for them. So if I could find someone to do all the purchasing orders, would you be able to help me with the sales? Or if you could take on another task in job one, would that work? Or what would that be? So when asking if with the could, and then a question, you really are asking about collaboration. It's a bit similar to that one, how can I support you, right? So if I present the situation, would that work?
Right, right. And it's a great way to where you can really start to negotiate and find that solution. If would, right? Or if could that work, right? So that's a
Mhm.
great one to use for sure.
Mhm. And so here, this is almost as a quick taste for, almost like a taster for the webinar that we're going to have in August, at the end of August. But really, culture is here. Hofstede said, culture is the software of the mind, right? And it really goes beyond the food and the language and how we dress and how we behave. It really goes beyond that. It's our customs, it's our attitudes, it's our values. It's really not the words we use, but how we understand them and how we use them.
Right.
So here, it really affects how we communicate. So some cultures are more direct. For example, Israelis tend to be super direct.
Mhm.
And then if you go to if you work with people from Japan or Thailand, you will see that they tend to be much more indirect. And that really affects how we deal with conflict. So direct cultures tend to find disagreement and debate positive. It's a good thing, and we should just discuss and argue about the things we don't, we're not on the same page on. And yeah, open confrontation is good, it's appropriate. But if you go to many Eastern countries, then you will see that disagreement and debate are negative for the team. They break the
Right.
harmony and they're not good. So here you will need to find a way to harmonize those teams. And that's what we will be talking about in a couple of months.
And many times, kind of going back to the point that was made earlier, many times when we have clients from a direct culture, they're saying that they're having a discussion. And then when we meet with their, Indian colleague, right, they're saying this was like they just yelled at me, or there was a big fight, or there was a big issue, right? So it's the same situation, but we're seeing this in two totally different ways. And all
Mhm.
of it stems from how we were raised and what type of culture, more direct or more indirect when it comes to disagreement and debate. 100%.
Oh, exactly. And so, yeah, this is how we may say that we don't agree. If you're in Germany, then you would say, I don't agree. But if you're in China, you may say, well, we agree and disagree at the same time. So it's a little bit more ambiguous.
Yeah.
Again, as we said here, I'm sure you have something to add, but we're going to send an email right when this webinar finishes. And that's where we will also share the link where you can sign up for this cross-cultural webinar. So make sure you click there, grab your spot. And I think that one's going to be super interesting. But yeah, careful with yes. It's an
Right.
easy word, right?
Yeah. So going back to this story, right, of our Israeli marketing manager and her Indian colleague. Um, and maybe some of you have gotten to start thinking about what are some tactics that could be used, right? So some active listening maybe can come into play here. Some clarifying questions can come into play here. But one very cultural aspect is the role of the word yes. What does yes mean? What does yes mean in more Western societies versus more Eastern societies? Many times, and if you're from India, I would love if you could throw something in the chat if you would agree with this or not, that yes doesn't necessarily mean that yes, I agree with you, and now we're going to do this thing. Many times it means yes, I understand what you're saying, or yes, I'm with you in this flow of the conversation. It could also be a hierarchy issue, right? If the marketing manager is hoping for some type of input or idea, and the Indian colleague is maybe beneath her in the hierarchy, they may say yes because that's what you should say, right? So especially this yes, I understand you versus yes, I agree with you are two very different things.
I lived that when I lived in Vietnam. I realized that yes also plays a different role. It's more
Right.
similar to India than it is in the US, for example. It tends to mean more, I hear you, instead of, okay, let's do that,
Right.
right?
And
So
this
that's
this
something.
small point right there is where we hear many times people saying that they lie or that they don't follow through in what they said they were going to do or their agreements. And then you have this conflict, right? Think
Mhm,
about how yes plays a role here is a big point.
exactly. So yeah, remember, you need to work together. You need to find that common ground. don't prolong the problem. It means the earlier you can tackle it, the better. The earlier you can fix it, the better. And try to find a solution if you can. And remember that phrase, how can I support you? How can we fix this together? Let's try to find a solution where we're both happy. And always try to leave on a positive note, even if the conversation was super messy. Try to find the good, the bright spots. And if there's any silver lining or any positives that you can get out of it or something you can agree on, try to end with that, because that will really contribute to then finding a long-term solution.
Right. And that's what we want. We want that purple box, right? That collaborating box. That's what we want, a more long-term solution.
Exactly. So if you were here for the whole time, what to remember? Well, there's cultural awareness. Again, check the email that we're about to send you with the link to that webinar. And remember the 3-step strategy that we just talked about, where we practice active listening with the RASA technique. We make our point using let's and we, and find common ground, things we agree on, and where we always look for collaboration with that conditional questions like, if I were to do this, would you agree with that? Or if we could add more budget to your team, what would you spend it on? That if questions in there. And yeah, we always encourage people to keep learning. We're going to send you lots of free resources. Simon and I do a podcast that is a lot of fun, and that, we always listen to your suggestions. So if you would like to hear or have a podcast or a webinar on a specific topic, hello@talaera.com is the email we have. We tend to get back straight away. We also have a blog. We keep having webinars every month. And we also have personalized training. So if you're really serious about improving your communication skills, we have many excellent teachers in all time zones ready to help you put, a plan together. And the way it works is you come, you tell us what you would like to work on. We truly understand who you are and what your needs are. And we try to find a teacher that is able to fulfill those needs, and that is truly able to help you with your with your learning needs. And that could be email writing, or perhaps you would like to work on pronunciation, or you work with teams from all over and your English is good, but you don't really understand what they mean, or there are misunderstandings. So anything you need, we're here, either free resources or personalized training. And yeah, Simon, anything else?
No, as always, this was a great time. And thank you to everyone saying thank you in the chat. It's so great that all of you could join. Again, check out all of our free resources. If you have any questions for Paolo or myself, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. We'd be happy. Yeah, thank you all so much. As always, we always say here at Talaera at the end, keep learning. To everyone out there. Thank you all so much. Go use the Rasa technique. Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing how it works. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. This has been nice. I like this webinar, doing this webinar with you, Simon.
Yeah.
It's my first time, but
it's a good one, and we need to practice more of our our conflict role plays. So we need to find a thing, and then we can work through it together. That would be fun for the last one.
I'll get my acting.
There you go. There you go. Same.
For sure.
All right, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.